So, guys, we got here, like I said, Dr. John Lott on here with us. He's going to be joining us to talk about the Audrey Held Manifesto and the issues behind it. But I also have some other questions for him. But he is the president and founder of the Crime Prevention Research Center. Many of you know him. He's there on Sebastian Gorka's show for writes many articles, including one with the Washington Examiner recently. So he has a lot of work behind him that helps him to do these things and to help us with this stuff. So let's welcome Dr. John Lott to the program. Welcome to the program, Dr. Lott.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, sir. So obviously, this has been like, a year that we've had to do it, trying to get this manifesto out with the transvestite manifesto, as it were, with the Audrey Held, the shooter of the Covenant School. And I think that in that manifesto, it probably is going to tell us a lot about, what this person thinks and says it does that would kind of shed light on what these people are doing. But maybe you could fill us in a little bit on this, because this is causing uproar that even journalist Lee is going to, they're trying to get him to give up sources of who's leaking this documentation to him. Help us to understand what's going on here, Dr. John Lott.
Right. Well, there had been a leak a little while ago to Stephen Crowder, 3 pages, but most recently there were 48 pages that were obtained by the parent company for the Tennessee Star. And, one of the things that I found most interesting was among what was provided was a letter from the FBI basically demanding that the diary not be made public. They were saying that it may create a backlash against transgender individuals, that it might cause people to kind of link mental illness with these types of attacks, and that they didn't think people were going to learn anything useful in terms of understanding why these attacks occur or where they occur or how to stop them from this. And I don't know, I think I have issues with all the reasoning there. I mean, first of all, these diaries and manifestos from these mass murderers are usually immediately provided to the press. This is very unusual. And the fact that the FBI, the Biden administration, was pushing so hard to keep this secret is something you just don't see. And, the fact that it was a transgender person, that a woman thinking that she was a man, I suspect, though it's not explicit, was the reason why this case is different than the other ones that they've had. But I think we can learn a lot from this. For example, this mass murderer had 3 other targets that she had considered, the Greenfield Mall and 2 other schools, but had decided not to attack any of those places because of security that was there. The Greenfield Mall allowed people to carry permanently concealed handguns. Apparently, she believed that there was armed security at the other 2 schools. And so she picked the Covenant School there because she thought it was a soft target that would be easy to kill people. And one of the things that you see time after time with these mass murders is a very consistent pattern. You have individuals who are suicidal, and she was clearly suicidal, who feel unappreciated or feel that there's some slight against them. And she was upset that people who own guns had more rights than trans individuals, supposedly. And they know they want to get media coverage, and they know the more people they kill, the more media coverage that they're going to get. And so if they go to a place where they know that victims aren't able to go and defend themselves, they're going to be able to go and kill more people and get more media coverage. I mean, that's something you see time after time. I know the media refuses to go and talk about how these mass murderers pick the targets that they do. But, on our website at crimeresearch.org, we've shown the diaries and manifestos from many of these killers where time after time they make it explicit. The Buffalo mass murder from the year before had a long discussion on it. So you have many explicit statements and you have implicit information on this too. I mean, going all the way back to the Columbine mass murder, where Dylan Klebold was apparently very upset about Colorado state legislature adopting a concealed carry law that would let people carry permitted concealed handguns on school property. He apparently had written the state legislators there demanding that they vote against it. You had the New York Times even on its front page talk about his opposition to the concealed carry law that was being provided. And one thing that people don't seem to mention is that the vote on the concealed carry law was scheduled on the very day that they attacked the Columbine school. That literally just a couple hours after the attack, the vote was scheduled, and the attack stopped the vote from occurring and prevented the concealed carry law from getting passed for a number of years there in the state. So, that's just one thing. But the notion that somehow, the FBI doesn't want people to link mental illness with either people engaging these attacks or transgender individuals, I think is a mistake. I mean, you overwhelming, as I mentioned, have people who are suicidal. To me, that's at least some measure of mental illness. Over half these mass murderers over the last 25 years were actually seeing mental health care professionals before their attack. That seems like another indication that people are having some type of mental illness type problems. And transgender individuals are obviously suicidal at very high rates. In fact, after they get so-called treatment, their suicide rate, it doubles from what it was before. So it's not particularly surprising that since 2018, transgender individuals are overrepresented by a factor of 7 more than their share of the population. So, they're very overrepresented. And given that they commit suicide at high rates, I guess it's not particularly surprising. So there are lots of things that we can learn. And it's unfortunate that the Biden administration has been fighting hard to try to keep this secret. And the media, unfortunately, even when it was released, the media, outside of, the New York Post covered it, but I'm sure some people view that as a conservative outlet. You have places like the Daily Signal or the Daily Caller might cover it, but those are all pretty much conservative outlets. The mainstream media just is ignoring this release of the diary.
Right. It's kind of like, just was a couple of weeks ago, really, that, this really came out about the Michael Patrick Leahy being told by that chancellor that he had to give up sources. But you said something interesting there to me. And, because there was a lot of speculation that someone was grooming this woman throughout the years to start having a violent tendency toward things. And so with such a large manifesto like that, I would figure you'd see something in there that talks about this journey of this person. But then the FBI not wanting it to be out and using an excuse like it's just going to fan hatred towards transgender people. Do you think that there is an active occurrence here of these groups, such as agents in the FBI, grooming these people to cause more problems so that they can chip away at the Second Amendment?
No. I don't think there's any evidence that the FBI was involved in instigating or planning or doing anything else with regard to this attack. I know of no evidence on that's the case, and I don't know of any evidence of them being involved in any of the other attacks. Obviously, the Tennessee Star hasn't released all the information in the diary that's there. It's much more of a diary than it is a manifesto. Obviously this person was a very left-wing individual, hated whites, hated men, even though apparently she wanted to be one. So there's lots of craziness in the piece.
Right. I guess. So basically, we have people out there that's probably kind of sensationalizing this because there's a lot of a lot of understandable.
I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen anything in the Tennessee Star or any place else about the FBI grooming somebody or being involved in the attack. I mean, there's nutty stuff out there. You have Alex Jones making claims over time and things like that, but I haven't seen anybody making such claims in this case.
Okay, so do you think that? I mean, obviously, because we just had 2 Supreme Court rulings, right, on the gun bans here. First, the bump stocks. Then you had a ruling where it was 8-1 on the cases of those who was under like domestic abuse, getting restraining orders on that. Are those? Is that an unconstitutional attempt to take away the Second Amendment rights of an individual regarding that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, first of all, the bump stock case was really not so much a gun case as it was just rule of law case. You had an administrative agency that was kind of making up its own rules. But, there's a reason why we have a Congress. We just don't let administrative agencies go and do whatever they want to go and do on these things. I think there's going to be a Supreme Court decision within the next week or so on something called the Chevron Doctrine, where courts have deferred to administrative agencies as the experts on things and let them pretty much interpret congressional authority any way they wanted to. And I think they're going to eliminate that and kind of go back to what it was beforehand, where these administrative agencies, like in the bump stock thing, are going to have to try to explain why Congress had delegated them that authority that they're using. And I think that will be an important decision. With regard to the second case that you're referring to, Rahimi, you had an individual who was a drug dealer, a very violent guy, had shot guns at people, had beaten up people. He hadn't been prosecuted for any of those cases. He should have been and should have been a felon for those things. But basically a domestic violence order was brought against him. He had the opportunity to go and contest it in court, but he declined to do so. So he was offered due process. And the decision from the court was if a court finds somebody is violent, then they can temporarily take away their guns. And there's historical precedence for that, which is pretty much what the Bruen decision involved. The Bruen decision, which came out 2 years ago, says that you go in to look to see what types of rules were in effect when the Second Amendment was adopted, or when the 14th Amendment applied the Second Amendment to the states after the Civil War. And there's things called surety bonds, which if somebody was indeed violent, there could be restrictions on their ability to go and have a gun. And that's pretty much, and there's some other related things that the courts used, and those have been around for a long time, been around when the Second Amendment was adopted. And so that's kind of the way that the court looked at that. And so I think, if you read John Roberts' decision, he wrote the main part of the decision there. There were a number of concurrences, but it's a pretty full-throated defense of the Second Amendment. He talks about how Lexington and Concord, how the first shots fired in the Revolutionary War were over the British government trying to take away people's guns and ammunition. He talks about how after the Civil War, Southern states tried to disarm blacks so that they could be intimidated and harassed and be victims, and how important it was for self-defense. And so, I think this was a tough case in the sense that the publicity around it. Nobody wants a violent, dangerous person to be able to go and have a weapon. But I think, and there's always this saying, bad cases make bad law. And the concern was here that the Biden administration, Merrick Garland, had pushed the Supreme Court to go and hear this case because they were hoping that they could get the Supreme Court to undo the Bruin decision from a couple years ago and go back on and drop the historical standard that they had adopted in there. But I think they lost. And I think the court will probably bring up more Second Amendment cases soon in order to kind of clarify things further.
Right. So basically, because with this really kind of boiling down to definitely the fear of us losing our Second Amendment rights. As we watch, crime seems to be increasing across the nation. You have police officers basically handcuffed in many places to where they can't handle these violent criminals. And even there in New York City, when you have the self-defense and gun use there, it's a time that, it's kind of fearful for people. We're afraid to lose the ability to defend ourselves. And when we see cases like this, I guess it really starts to, it bothers me for certain, of what they could do later. That was my worry about the Raheny case. But, obviously I wouldn't want some domestic abuser out there that could go and kill the woman, or man, vice versa. But what about that? What do you think that this is a time that we need to be really strong against these things because of our ability to defend ourselves against the crime that's running rampant right now in many, especially blue areas?
Right. Well, I'd make an even stronger statement than you made. You said it seems like, at least initially, it seems like crime is increasing. And I would argue very strongly that it's increasing. I know the media wants to try to convince people that crime isn't increasing. But I think people can go in many parts of this country to the local CVS or Walgreens and see that they put up all sorts of glass that you have to go and get a sales clerk to come out and unlock it and stand next to you while you go and read the ingredients. And they know that wasn't the case a few years ago. But what the media likes to look at is something called the FBI data on reported crimes. The thing is, we've known for many decades that most crimes aren't reported to police. Only about 42% of violent crimes are reported to police, and only about 32% of property crimes are reported to police. And there's two different sources of data. There's the FBI data that the media cites all the time, and then there's the National Crime Victimization Survey data, which surveys 240,000 people each year, which is a massive survey, in order to try to get a measure of reported and unreported crime to get an idea what total crime is. And these two numbers in the past usually went together, but in the last few years, they've gone in opposite directions. So, for example, in 2022, the last year that the National Crime Victimization data is available for, while the FBI showed a 2% drop in reported crimes, the National Crime Victimization Survey showed a 42% increase in violent crimes, which is like unbelievably huge. It's the largest increase we've ever seen. And I think it fits in with what you were saying about changes in policing, liberal, left-wing, progressive district attorneys who are refusing to prosecute violent criminals or others, as well as liberal judges in many of these places. And so just on your first point about policing, just to give people an idea, I mean, there's been a huge drop in arrest rates across all cities, but let's say you take large cities of over 1 million in population. What you find is that in the 5 years before COVID, the average arrest rate for violent crimes was about 44%. It started falling in 2020. And by 2022, it was down to 20% of reported violent crimes result in arrests. That's over a 50% drop from 44% to 20%. I haven't seen that type of change over many decades, let alone within 3 years. And another way to, and there was an even greater drop in property crime arrests. But if you look at arrests as a percentage of total crimes, not just for reported crimes, what you find is that only 8% of violent crimes in those cities resulted in arrest, and only 1% of property crimes in those cities resulted in arrest. And people need to understand that just because you're arrested doesn't mean you're charged, and just because you're charged doesn't mean that you're going to be prosecuted or convicted. And so, these criminals across the country have very little to worry about in terms of consequences for committing crimes. And so, as you said, and I believe it's correct, as they have less to worry about, you've seen a big increase in violent crime rates. And, I'm sure, I suspect in the debate on Thursday, you're going to see Biden and the moderators cite the FBI crime data for reported crimes falling. And I can only hope that Trump will respond and say, well, that's true, but total crimes are going up. And one of the things that we know is that the rate that people report crimes to the police depend upon whether they think that criminals are going to get caught and whether they're going to be punished. And with this huge drop in arrest rates, it's not going to be too shocking to find that there's some people who previously would have reported a crime who aren't reporting it now because they're told nothing's going to happen to these criminals. And also, it's become more difficult for people to report crimes. In many of these jurisdictions, you call up 911 and you're asked if it's an emergency. And basically that means, is the criminal there still committing the crime? And if he's not, they'll say, well, you can come down to the police station and fill out a report. And that wasn't the case a few years ago. A few years ago, they would send out a police car. But now with the reductions in police that you're mentioning, it's more difficult. And so there's some people who would have gone down or would have had the police come out and report it, now aren't going to go down to the police station themselves in order to go and report the crime. And so there are lots of things going on. I could go on for a long time talking about this, but the irony to me is that the same people who are making it so law enforcement can't do its job are the same people who want to make it so victims aren't able to go and defend themselves. And if my research convinces me of anything, it's the most vulnerable people in our society who benefit the most from owning guns. It's people who are the most likely victims of violent crime, and that overwhelmingly tends to be poor blacks who live in high crime urban areas, and people who are relatively weaker physically, women and the elderly. And Democrats claim that they care about blacks, that they care about poor people, that they care about women. But who do they think are the victims of these crimes? Criminals tend to commit crimes near where they live. They tend to commit crimes against people who are very similar socioeconomically. 90% of blacks are murdered by other blacks. And you have a similar thing across other types of violent crime categories. And so, and it's just not the direct victims of crime. You have in those neighborhoods, stores close because of the higher crime rates, or they have to charge higher prices. Their insurance premiums go up. Well, who owns those stores disproportionately? They tend to be similar types of people. So blacks. Who tends to work in those stores? They tend to be blacks. Who shops in those stores? Who now don't have a place to go and shop or find the things they're buying more expensive? Well, they're blacks. And who owns houses in those areas whose property values are depressed because of the higher violent crime rates? Well, there's obviously the same types of people there. And so, you kind of hope that, the media would point these types of things out. But unfortunately, just like the discussion we had about violent crime in the media, media headline after media headline will say violent crime is falling or crime is falling. But people are mistakenly believing that it's going up. And my response is, people aren't wrong. It's just that the media, either purposefully or just because they don't understand, don't understand the different types of crime numbers that are there.
I agree. And, as we sit here and watch all these things occur, it is very troubling. I think it's more reasons to kind of make people, not motivated, maybe more fearful, easily controlled. But anyway, in closing here, John, tell everybody how they can follow you and learn more from what you do with your research out there.
Well, our website's at crimeresearch.org, crimeresearch.org. All the information that we've been talking about, as well as the sources to the underlying data, is available at crimeresearch.org. People can see that. They could also follow us on Twitter or Facebook.
Awesome. Well, John, I appreciate you. Very much coming on with this tonight. Very informative, wealth of information, sir.
All right. Well, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. All right, everybody, don't go away. We have more coming. This is Battlefront Frontline.